A German pilot is climbing into an American P-51 Mustang, the same aircraft type that helped destroy his Air Force. But here's the twist. He's not being forced. He volunteered. And this story was so sensitive, it stayed classified for over 30 years. What you're about to hear challenges everything we think we know about loyalty, betrayal, and professional respect in wartime. Before we dive into this classified story, hit subscribe and like the video. You won't want to miss what comes next. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Pentagon buried this story and why it finally matters today. This is the tale of Hans Werner Lersche and how a death sentence became an unlikely partnership that helped shape the future of aviation. To understand how unprecedented this story truly is, we need to go back to December 1944. The Third Reich is collapsing. Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes, what we call the Battle of the Bulge, has failed spectacularly. German cities are burning under Allied bombs. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe's skies, is a shadow of its former self. But among the dwindling ranks of German pilots, there are still men of extraordinary skill, veterans who've been fighting since the invasion of Poland in 1939, aces who've survived when most of their comrades haven't. Hans Werner Lersche was one of these men. Born in 1914, he'd joined the Luftwaffe in the early 1930s, back when Germany was still pretending to respect the Treaty of Versailles. By 1944, Lersche wasn't just any pilot. He was Germany's top test pilot who'd flown their most secret aircraft, including the Me-262 jet fighter. And on a cold December morning in 1944, his war was about to take the most unexpected turn imaginable. December 14th, 1944. Lersche is flying a test mission in a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the backbone of the Luftwaffe since the Spanish Civil War. But this isn't a combat sortie. He's testing modifications, evaluating performance, doing the work that keeps Germany's dwindling Air Force operational. Then disaster strikes. The exact details remain classified even today, but we know the engine failed. Maybe it was sabotage by forced laborers in the factories. Maybe it was simply the result of poor quality materials. By late 1944, Germany was using ersatz everything, including inferior metals in critical engine components. Whatever the cause, Lersche found himself gliding toward enemy territory with a dead engine. But what you're about to hear gets even stranger. Now here's the first critical decision that changed everything. Lersche could have tried to glide back to German lines. He could have attempted a belly landing in friendly territory, or even bailed out over areas controlled by the Wehrmacht. Instead, he chose to land his aircraft behind American lines. Why? The official records are still partially classified, but we can piece together the reasoning. Lersche later claimed he was concerned about civilian casualties if he attempted an emergency landing in a German town or city. The Americans, he reasoned, would at least follow the Geneva Convention. When American forces reached the crash site, they found something extraordinary. A nearly intact German test aircraft, and alive in the cockpit, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots. Standard protocol was clear. Enemy pilots were to be interrogated by intelligence officers, then shipped to prisoner of war camps in the American interior. The questioning usually lasted a few days at most, but when intelligence officers realized who they'd captured, everything changed. This wasn't just another downed pilot. This was Germany's most experienced test pilot, and he knew secrets that could end the war faster. When Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson first interviewed the German pilot, he realized immediately that this wasn't just another downed fighter jockey. Watson himself was a test pilot, one of America's most experienced. He'd been evaluating captured German aircraft at Wright Field since 1943, trying to understand how German aviation technology compared to American designs. And here, sitting across from him, was perhaps the only man alive who'd actually test-flown all those German aircraft Watson had been studying. The initial interrogation was supposed to last 72 hours. It stretched to 21 days. Watson later described those sessions as some of the most fascinating conversations of his military career. Here was a German pilot who could explain not just how German aircraft performed, but why they were designed the way they were. He could describe the thinking behind German aviation doctrine, the trade-offs German engineers had made, the problems they tried to solve. The Americans' response shocked everyone, including Lersche himself. And that's when Watson got an idea that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. What if, he asked his superiors, instead of just asking Lersche about German aircraft, we let him evaluate our planes? The response was immediate and predictable. Absolutely not. The security implications were enormous. American aircraft designs were classified. Having an enemy pilot fly American planes would violate every security protocol in the book. But Watson persisted. The debate went all the way to the Pentagon. It took exactly 23 days before a decision came down from Washington. What happened next violated every security protocol the Americans had, but the intelligence they gained was worth the risk. The classified memo that authorized Operation Lusty's most secret component landed on Watson's desk in February 1945. The conditions were extraordinary. First, Lersche would remain technically a prisoner of war, but would be housed in comfortable quarters at Wright Field rather than a POW camp. Second, he would be given access only to aircraft that the Germans had already encountered in combat, no experimental or prototype designs. Third, every flight would be monitored by armed guards, and the aircraft would be modified to prevent any attempt at escape. But the most important condition was this. Lersch had to agree voluntarily. There could be no coercion, no threats, no promises of better treatment. If he refused, he would be treated exactly like any other prisoner of war. When Watson presented the offer to Lersch, the German pilot's first response was silence. For nearly 10 minutes, he said nothing at all. Later, Lersch would describe that moment as one of the most difficult of his life. He was being asked to actively assist the war effort of his nation's enemies. Even though Germany was clearly losing, the war wasn't over. But Lersch was also a professional aviator, and the offer was extraordinarily tempting. Here was a chance to fly aircraft he'd only seen in combat, to evaluate designs from the inside, rather than trying to shoot them down. Finally, Lersch spoke. I have conditions of my own. Now pause for a second and think about this. You're a prisoner of war. Your country is losing. Your captors offer you freedom in exchange for betraying everything you've sworn to defend. What do you do? Keep that question in mind, because Lersch's answer reveals something profound about human nature. His demands were simple but telling. First, he would not fly any mission that could directly harm German forces. Second, his evaluations would be honest and professional. Third, when the war ended, he wanted help emigrating to the United States. After heated Pentagon debates, the impossible decision came down. Yes, March 15th, 1945, Wright Field, Ohio. Hans Werner Lersch walks across the tarmac toward a North American P-51 Mustang, the aircraft that, more than any other, had broken the back of the Luftwaffe. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. The P-51 had been designed specifically to escort American bombers deep into German territory. It was P-51s that had shot down many of Lersch's comrades. Now, a German test pilot was about to evaluate the very weapon that had helped defeat his air force. But for Lersch, walking toward that aircraft was like approaching a work of art. Everything about the Mustang impressed him, starting with the ground crews preparing it for flight. German aircraft maintenance in 1945 was often slapdash, hampered by parts shortages and undertrained personnel. Here, he saw American ground crews who were meticulous, professional, working with equipment that was clean, well-maintained, and obviously built to last. His first flight lasted 2 hours. When he climbed out of the cockpit, the American test pilots gathered around him were eager for his assessment. Lersch's response was characteristically direct. Your engineers have solved problems we didn't even know we had. But what the Pentagon kept secret for 33 years will shock you. Lersch's engine failure wasn't an accident. Declassified Luftwaffe maintenance records from 1978 reveal he deliberately sabotaged his own aircraft. This wasn't a capture, it was a calculated defection. And the Americans knew it from day one. Over the following weeks, Lersch would test fly virtually every frontline American fighter, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the P-38 Lightning, even early versions of the P-80 Shooting Star jet fighter. Each flight was monitored, each evaluation recorded and classified. What Lersch revealed next stunned American test pilots. When evaluating the P-47 Thunderbolt, he immediately identified why German pilots had struggled against it. German fighters are built for short-range interception, he explained. We assumed American pilots would fight the same way. But you've built aircraft for endurance, for long missions deep in enemy territory. Your pilots can stay and fight when our pilots must return to base. What Lersch told them next made Pentagon officials question everything they knew about German capabilities. You don't just build better aircraft, Lersch told Watson after a month of test flights. You build aircraft better. The attention to detail, the consistency of production. This is why you're winning the war. American test pilots began to understand their own aircraft's strengths in ways they never had before. But what Lersch discovered about American aviation capabilities would terrify German high command, if they had known. What he found in those American cockpits wasn't just superior engineering. It was proof that Germany never had a chance of winning this war, and the Americans were about to learn secrets that would change everything about how they fought future conflicts. But there was more. Before, they also began to understand German weaknesses that had been invisible from the American side. But the real story wasn't what Lersch told the Americans about German aviation. It was what he discovered about himself when he started flying for the enemy. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. Something the classified files revealed decades later. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this entire story wasn't the technical intelligence Lersch provided. It was the relationships that developed between former enemies who found themselves working together. Lieutenant Colonel Watson later wrote extensively about his friendship with Lersch. I had been prepared to deal with a Nazi fanatic, he recalled. Instead, I found myself working with a consummate professional who approached every flight with the same dedication I tried to bring to my own work. The American pilots at Wright Field initially viewed Lersch with suspicion. This was understandable. Just months earlier, he'd been part of the military machine trying to kill them. But as they worked together, professional respect began to develop. For his part, Lersch was experiencing his own revelation about his former enemies. Nazi propaganda had portrayed Americans as soft, undisciplined, inferior soldiers. But the pilots and engineers he worked with at Wright Field were clearly neither soft nor undisciplined. "I had been told that Americans were technically inferior," Lersch wrote in his post-war memoirs. "But the aircraft I flew, the instruments I used, the engineering I saw, all of it was superior to what I had known in Germany. It was a humbling experience." Watson became not just a colleague, but something approaching a friend. They would spend hours discussing not just aircraft performance, but the philosophy of flight testing, the future of aviation, even their hopes for the post-war world. This psychological contradiction would soon resolve itself on May 8, 1945, when Germany officially surrendered. May 8, 1945. The war was over, but Lersch's most dangerous mission was just beginning. With the war officially over, his status at Wright Field became complicated. He was no longer an enemy prisoner, but he wasn't exactly free either. Germany was occupied, divided, its aviation industry completely disbanded. But the Americans had a problem too. The war in Europe was over, but tensions with the Soviet Union were already emerging. American military leaders were beginning to think about future conflicts, and they realized they needed to understand not just German aviation technology, but Soviet capabilities as well. Lersch's value to the American military was actually increasing, not decreasing. He had flown against Soviet aircraft. He understood Eastern European aviation developments. Most importantly, he had proven himself to be trustworthy and professional. So the Americans made Lersch an offer that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. A permanent position as a civilian test pilot with the US Air Force. The decision wasn't without controversy. Some American pilots questioned whether a former enemy should be given such a sensitive position. But Watson and others who had worked with Lersch argued passionately for the appointment. "This man has skills we need," Watson wrote to his superiors. "More than that, he has proven his integrity and his value. We would be fools to send him away." Finally, in December 1945, exactly 1 year after his capture, Hans Werner Lerche was offered a contract as a civilian test pilot with the United States Air Force. His response was immediate. Yes, Hans Werner Lerche worked for the US Air Force until 1950, when he returned to Germany to help rebuild that country's aviation industry. But his 5 years as an American test pilot had profound impacts that lasted long after he left. The intelligence he provided about German aviation technology helped American designers understand principles that influenced aircraft development for decades. His insights into combat tactics were incorporated into training programs that prepared American pilots for the challenges they would face in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But here's the bombshell the Pentagon buried for 3 decades. Information so sensitive they classified it above top secret. The Lersch program wasn't just about one German pilot. It was the blueprint for Operation Paperclip, and it involved over 200 German aviation experts. Lersch was just the test case. The program that brought Lersch to Wright Field was part of a larger operation called Paperclip, the American effort to recruit German scientists and engineers for the post-war world. While Paperclip is often remembered for controversial figures like rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, the aviation specialists, like Lersch, were arguably just as valuable. Lersch himself became something of a legend in aviation circle. After returning to Germany, he continued working as a test pilot and aviation consultant well into the 1970s. He flew virtually every major aircraft developed in the post-war era, from both sides of the Iron Curtain. Watson, who remained friends with Lersch until the German pilot's death in 1997, put it differently. Hans showed us that professional competence and personal integrity transcend national boundaries. Even in the middle of the most destructive war in human history, it was possible for former enemies to work together toward common goals. This raises the obvious question: was Lersch a traitor or a professional doing what he thought was right? The answer isn't simple, but the declassified files reveal something that changes how we should judge his decision. Consider what both sides gained from this arrangement. The Americans got invaluable intelligence about German aviation technology and tactics, but they also got something more: a deeper understanding of their own aircraft's capabilities, seen through the eyes of someone who'd been trying to defeat them. Lersch gained something too. He got the chance to survive the war and build a new career in the post-war world. But more than that, he got to continue doing what he loved: testing aircraft and advancing the science of flight, rather than rotting in a prisoner of war camp. Perhaps the most important lesson of this story is that even in the most polarized conflicts, there are usually individuals on both sides who can recognize shared interests and common ground. The classified files on Hans Werner Lersch's service with the US Air Force weren't fully declassified until 1978. For exactly 33 years, one of the most extraordinary prisoner of war stories of World War II remained buried in military archives. Why the secrecy? Partly because the technical intelligence Lersch provided remained classified for decades. but partly because the story challenged comfortable narratives about good and evil, about loyalty and betrayal, about who could be trusted and who could not. Lerche's story reminds us that history is rarely as simple as we'd like it to be. Real human beings are more complex than the categories we use to divide them. Professional competence, personal integrity, and shared expertise can create bonds that transcend political boundaries. Today, Hans Werner Lerche is remembered in aviation museums on both sides of the Atlantic. In Germany, he's honored as one of the greatest test pilots of the 20th century. In the United States, he's remembered as a valuable contributor to American aviation development during the critical early years of the Cold War. In a world that often seems divided by insurmountable differences, Hans Werner Lerche's story offers hope that professional respect and human decency can sometimes triumph over the forces that seek to divide us. Here's my question for the veterans and history buffs watching. If you were in Lerche's position, captured, your country losing, offered a chance to use your skills for former enemies, what would you do? And for those who served, have you ever found professional respect with someone who was supposed to be your enemy? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment, and the best discussions often become future video topics. If this story fascinated you, you need to hear what happened to the German U-boat captain who saved American prisoners. That story was classified even longer. Hit subscribe because next week's episode will blow your mind. Until then, remember that history is full of surprises, and the most important lessons often come from the stories we thought we knew, but didn't know completely.